Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. All right. Now, are you all sitting in the back on purpose? Okay, so you have, okay, so I won't force you. So because this room is so long, I just want to see everybody's smiling faces. So if you're back there, if you feel like moving up, that would be much appreciated. If not, we'll just make sure that we project. But it's so good to be here. Good to see you all on a Saturday morning. Thank you for taking your time to talk about, I think, just an important subject. As I said, in the midst of everything that's going on in this world, we know that justice is something that we have to continue to fight for. And environmental justice is a part of that frame. So with that, I'm glad you're here for this session on coal-fired power plants, climate and energy alternatives. And what we're going to do is I'll kick off with a little introduction and then introduce our wonderful panelists. They'll have about 10 minutes to give their perspective addressing some of the framing questions. And then we'll hopefully have enough time for discussion, for Q&A, which is really the good part. So we're going to try and stay on task even though we're about 15 minutes late. So with that, my name is Dr. Jalon White Newsome, and I'm a federal policy analyst with a community-based organization called We Act for Environmental Justice. To my left is Ms. Christine Keels. To her left is Ms. Kathy Kinsey. And to her left is Mr. Mike Tidwell. So again, you have their bios in your folder, I believe, or on the website, but I'll just give a couple of lines about where they're coming from. So I always like to start off with this picture, and I'm not sure, can you all see that?
Yeah.
You're good, okay, because I don't want you to go to sleep, so I really don't want to turn the lights off. But who's that lady in the middle? Does anybody know?
Gina McCarthy.
All right, and everybody knows she is the
EPA Administrator.
Okay, I never like to assume. So she is the person that's responsible for protecting our health. And I don't know if you all know, but these two little ladies to the right, little brown girls, are mine. They're 8 and 5. And when I think about the work that I do and the work that I'm sure you do in this room, it's about protecting those vulnerable populations and making sure that they have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink from, and are living in environments that are going to help them grow and develop in ways where they can be productive citizens. So it's not about me, it's about the folks that are coming after that. So as I said, I work for a community-based organization. We're headquartered in Harlem, New York, but I run our DC office. And all of what we've tried to do is build healthy communities by making sure that low-income communities of color have a voice. Again, that's so important. That's seminal about communities speaking for themselves in the EJ movement, and that's what we're talking about today. And so our mission in the DC office is the same. Everything that we do in Harlem, New York, I try and back up in DC, just making sure that our federal policy has that same protective sense. So we do this through research, through advocacy, and building sustainable policy. It's all right to protest, but what do you do after the protest? What do you put in place to make sure that the things that you're protesting about aren't just going to continue in the business as usual scenario? So I never like to assume that people understand what the EJ movement is. And so the environmental justice movement was created to get rid of environmental racism, which again, does that still exist today? Okay, I just want to make sure. So again, this is a movement that started again with folks like Charles Lee, and communities are still today continuing to be impacted, even though we have many more laws and regulations in place. So why is this important? When justice isn't part of the equation, we see things happening like energy efficiency not going to the communities where it needs to. We see money that's not being resourced and targeted in areas where it needs to go. We see folks continuing to live with asthma and other health conditions that they don't deserve to. So it's important that we think about justice. And part of this session is to really explore, a lot of different things, but the opportunities through one of these pieces of legislation. One of the rules, actually, the Clean Power Plan that the Environmental Protection Agency put forth in the beginning of June. This is something I believe that is major. It's going to change the energy landscape of our nation, and it will hopefully bring some great things to our communities. And so it's important that justice is a part of this equation as we talk about this plan. So with that, one of the things that we ACT and others in the EJ community have really been trying to push is that we have to make sure this plan keeps justice at the forefront. So it's important that even though this is a federal rule, which to some is like, oh, I don't really care, it's important because the states are going to be the one that are going to have to really implement this rule in a way that is protective of communities. So you will hear more about specifically what's going on in the state of Maryland, but wherever you're from, Virginia, DC, Maryland, think about how this might impact the neighborhood that you live in, on the neighborhoods that you know or work in. It's extremely important. So one of the things that I want to urge you to do, and again, it's not just about getting information, but it's about using it and being proactive and advocating. This is a website that we have where you can get more resources and get an EJ perspective on this power plan. So I encourage you to check that out and definitely contact me if you have any questions. But with that, for our discussion today, here are some of the questions that our panelists are going to try and hit on. So essentially, what are the EJ implications of this plan? What is the state of air in Maryland? How are you breathing? How is the state of Maryland working to reduce emissions and broaden the clean energy platform? And how have communities actually been engaged in this conversation? Looking at some of the cost benefits, you know, the dollars that might be saved on making people healthier, how can those dollars be transferred to other avenues? And then what can communities do to advocate, again, and be really an intentional part of how the Clean Power Plan plays out in different states? So with that, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists. And again, I will start from the left. And I'm going to use my, let me see here. At least I thought it was in here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Okay, where'd it go? Yes, myself. Okay. So Miss Christine Keels was born in Arkansas and reared by her lovely family in Memphis, Tennessee. She attended Boston College in Boston, Massachusetts, where she received a BA degree in sociology and later received a master's degree in criminal justice from American University in Washington, D.C. Ms. Keels has been a spokesperson for environmental constraints as it relates to health, specifically asthma. She developed this chronic illness in the early 80s and continues to thrive towards stable health, promoting awareness related to environmental constraints and health care for all. And I could go on and on about Ms. Keels. She has received numerous awards, has been an advocate in the community. I encourage you to listen and ask her questions. So that little bit that I just said isn't doing her justice, but that is Ms. Christine Keels. To her left is Ms. Kathy Kinsey, Esquire. Ms. Kinsey is the Deputy Secretary for Regulatory Programs and Operations at the Maryland Department of the Environment, known as MDE. Kathy has oversight responsibility for the department's regulatory programs, administrative activities. That includes the department's 4 principal media-based administrations. She represented the department for nearly 20 years during the period from '89 through 2008 in her role as Assistant Attorney General with the Office of Maryland Attorney General, handling civil and administrative enforcement and permit actions and providing support. And she also is very engaged in the RGGI program in Maryland, which she'll talk about. And again, it's a lot more I could read, but due to time constraints, I won't. And then finally, Mr. Mike Tidwell is the founder and director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, a grassroots nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness about the impacts and solutions associated with global warming in Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. In 2003, Tidwell received the Audubon Naturalist Society's prestigious Conservation Award. 2 years later, he received an honorary doctorate of letters from Nichols State University in Thibodaux, Louisiana. A longtime resident of Maryland, Tidwell lives in Tacoma Park with his wife, Beth, and son, Sasha. So thank you all for what I know is going to be a great session, and we will start with Kathy.
Great. So,
Let's now get you started. And so, does everybody have a pen in their hand? All right, I want you all to take notes now.
so where am I? Let me just don't go abandon me yet. Okay, good, great, good, super. Okay, great, thank you. So, good morning, everyone. This is great. Thanks, John. This is a great opportunity to be here. These are really important issues. They're great issues. I've been working on environmental justice issues and power plant issues, among many other issues, for quite a number of years. So, This is kind of a really exciting time for us in the states and at the federal government with the proposal of the Clean Power Plan. So there's a lot of great thinking that's going on around the country, and EPA has done unprecedented outreach to the states and to all the stakeholders, communities, the utility industry, citizens, advocates, environmental advocates, the business community on this rule. So it's very complex rule. It's probably one of the most complex rules EPA has ever done in its history, and it's really a landmark rule. So I think those of us in the states that have been working on air quality issues and climate change issues are really excited about this. So having said that, my role today, I think, as part of this first panel here, is to provide some context and background for our discussion later, to talk about Maryland's generation portfolio, coal-fired generation portfolio, what it looks like, how it's changing, the progress that we have made in recent years on air quality, a little bit about EPA's Clean Power Plan, very high level, and a little bit about RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is Maryland's existing power plant program to control greenhouse gas emissions from our fossil fuel sector. And I'm going to use a PowerPoint. I really don't like PowerPoints because they're not great for discussion purposes, but I am going to talk a little bit about some statistics and some trends. And so, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words when you're, when you're trying to convey data and trends. So, so here is what our generation portfolio looks like today in Maryland. You can see that we are still predominantly a coal state, but we have our coal sector. We have reduced our dependence on coal for generation. So you can see this is what's happened in the last well, not in the last, but in the 7 years between 2005 and 2012, which is 2012 is like a benchmark that we are using for a lot of our data because it's complete data. It's been QA/QC'd, and it is, you know, we know it to be accurate. So you can see that in that 7-year period, we have had nearly a 20% reduction in generation from our coal and oil plants in the state. At the same time, we have had a 10% increase in natural gas generation in the state, which is, it's a fossil fuel, but it's cleaner, much cleaner, and approximately a 10% increase in our renewables generation in the state. So, you know, we have a very clear, you know, downward trend in coal generation in Maryland, and we expect that to continue in large part because of the new federal rules that are being proposed, not just the Clean Power Plan for greenhouse gas emissions, but a number of other rules that are final and will be implemented or are about to be implemented. In Maryland, I will just say on that subject that we have 4 new natural gas combined cycle, which are the cleanest of the natural gas generation facilities in various stages of permitting, planning, and construction in Maryland. So you can see that we are indeed, you know, starting a real transition, you know, away from coal and to cleaner burning and renewables generation in Maryland. So. This is our coal fleet in Maryland. You're looking at our coal fleet in Maryland. And in the past 8 years, you know, one of the department's highest environmental priorities, and I've worked on this a lot personally, has been to reduce the harmful emissions from our coal-fired power plants. So, and our primary pollutants of concern are, of course, the ones that cause the adverse health impacts on our citizens. So we're concerned about nitrogen oxide emissions, which contribute to ozone pollution. We're concerned about sulfur dioxide emissions because they contribute to the formation of particulate matter, which also has adverse respiratory and cardiovascular health impacts. And the last major one, there are many others, but the last major one is mercury emissions, because mercury, as we know, gets into our food chain. and it is a neurotoxin with a lot of very serious long-term health impacts, especially for the vulnerable populations. So in 2006, Maryland passed the Healthy Air Act, which was a landmark statute that set very stringent emissions limitations for all three of these pollutants that I have just mentioned for our coal-fired power plants. And the limitations effectively required the installation of really state-of-the-art pollution controls on most of our coal-fired power plants. Not all of them, but most of them. So this chart here on the left shows you which units have state-of-the-art. So the ones on the left have the state-of-the-art NOx emission controls. The ones on the right, they have controls for nitrogen oxide emissions, but they're not as advanced as the ones on the left. So their ability to remove nitrogen oxide from the flue gas stream coming out of the stack is not as efficient, not as good. So in SO2, same thing. The units on the left are units that have installed state-of-the-art controls for sulfur dioxide emissions. The units on the right do not have any controls, post-combustion we call them, controls for sulfur dioxide. So, and I will say that with the sulfur dioxide controls, these state-of-the-art controls on these plants on the left, they remove up to 95%, close to 95% of sulfur dioxide emissions, and there's a very good removal efficiency, similarly around 80 to 90% with the NOx control emissions. So what is the effect of these pollution controls and the new emissions limitations under the Healthy Air Act had on Maryland's air quality? So here's what it looks like, and you can see, that we've had a really dramatic reduction in NOx emissions from 2002, and I mean this chart, tells a great story. It's close to about 75% from 2002 levels in nitrogen oxide emissions. Same with sulfur dioxide emissions, similar reduction, nearly between 65 and 75% reduction. And then, I don't have a graph for the mercury emissions, but we have achieved nearly a 90% reduction in mercury emissions from the coal-fired power plants that are subject to the Healthy Air Act, which are, all the ones that you saw on the previous chart. So we've come down a lot on, in all three emissions. So here's what our air quality. I'm going to show you these charts. This is the effect of the emissions reductions on our air quality. So you can see the top two charts are ozone, our ozone levels. And you can see that we used to have a 1-hour ozone standard. Now we have an 8-hour ozone standard. We had an 85 parts per billion ozone standard. It dropped down to 75 parts per billion. That's the current standard. So the lower bar on the right is the current standard. And you can see that we've made a lot of progress in air quality. We're not quite there. We're not meeting the 75 standard yet officially, although we have had two very good cool summers, 2013 and 2014. And so we actually, if you look at our data from 2013 and 2014, we are actually now meeting the 75 parts per billion standard for ozone in Maryland in all areas of the state. I don't know that we're going to stay there because a lot of that is just totally dependent on weather conditions. So when you have cool weather, the power plants don't run as much. You don't have, the same level of emissions. So, we'll see what happens with the next summer in 2015. And then the bottom two graphs are our fine particulate emissions. And you can see we have been in pretty good shape for meeting the fine particulate standards. For a number of years. We're well below the standards. We're in compliance with both the annual and the daily standard. So that's sort of where we are. This is another, I love this map because it just shows, it really shows the dramatic progress that we've made over the years, sort of in a different way. The reds and the purples are bad. The greens and the light tans are good. And so you can see that, you can sort of see from 1990, just shows you basically what's been happening over the last 25 years, with air quality in Maryland. And the little chart on the bottom shows you sort of like what the numbers mean, what the colors mean. We've got our current standard is, 75. EPA has just proposed, for those of you who are following, EPA has just proposed dropping the current standard from 75 down to between 65 and 70. So, yeah. I don't know if I'm going to make that, but I'll do my best. So that's a big, that's a big decline, and that's a great cause for concern for all of us. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the health impacts because I know Christine is going to talk about health impacts. But you can see that ozone pollution is our most intractable air quality problem, and these are some of the the reasons why we're so concerned about it. And then, we also, we also know that it has real impacts on mortality. It's associated with increased mortality, missed school days, missed work days, increased hospital admissions, all those things. And I'm sure Christine will be talking in more detail about that. This is just I'm just going to touch on this. This is a chart that shows what we project in the department based on some analysis that we've done. The benefits, the health benefits that we project we will see in 2018 if all of the existing programs, federal and state, remain in effect, and if the new suite of programs that we expect to be adopted between now and 2018, we have some new regs on the books that are going forward in Maryland, and the federal government has some rules, and so this is, you can see the top number in each of these categories and cells is sort of the number for all of the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states that are part of our group. We have a group of states that works together on these air quality issues, and the bottom line shows you Maryland's number. So those are the benefits that we expect to see, and I would just draw your attention to the two that really stand out. The acute respiratory symptoms and lost school days are the two biggest impacts. So, what's next for us on air quality in Maryland? So, we've got this new proposed, much more stringent ozone standard. It's being proposed. It has not been adopted, but assuming that we get a lower standard, we will definitely not be able to meet this lower standard in Maryland. There is no question about it. We are going to need new local reduction controls and measures in the state of Maryland. And as important as our own local measures, we are definitely going to need some reductions in upwind states. One of Maryland's biggest problems with air quality is is transport from upwind states and power plants and industrial sources out in the west, in the Midwest, and in the southern part of the country that get carried on the winds into Maryland. So we're going to need both of those things in order to achieve this new lower standard when it's adopted. And so we're working on a couple of different things in Maryland to try to address both the upwind and issue and also the local emissions. And we've just proposed a new power plant rule in Maryland, which some of you may be familiar with, and I encourage you to look at it, to comment on it. It was published in the Maryland Register on December 1st, and it is going to require some significant reductions in emissions from our existing coal plant fleet in two phases. A first phase that takes effect next year, 2015, the ozone season in the summer, and a later phase in 2020, which is basically going to require all those coal-fired power plants in Maryland that have not installed advanced nitrogen oxide controls to either install them, fuel switch to natural gas, or retire the plant. That's in progress. As I said, it's a proposed rule. It has not been finally adopted. So I'm going to talk really quickly now about, at a very, very super high level, about the Clean Power Plan. I got to talk about that because I have to set the stage. Okay. So EPA has proposed this. EPA has proposed this rule, and it sets goals in 2030 for statewide CO2 emission reductions. It sets targets for existing fossil fuel-fired plants. It's based on the targets that each individual state were proposed by EPA for each individual state are based on these 4 building blocks here. So EPA looked at, in every state, they looked at the potential for efficiency improvements at the coal plant. They looked at how much can we shift generation to cleaner natural gas plants, how much can we expand our renewable energy sources, solar, wind, nuclear, and how much can we expand our energy efficiency programs, which reduce demand for electricity at the outset. And so looking at all of those different factors, EPA, on a state-by-state basis, set individual state targets for each of the states. This rule is projected to achieve a 30% nationwide reduction in CO2 emissions by 2005, from 2005 by 2030. The rule is going to be final in June, and the EPA has been very clear they're going to meet that deadline. Our state compliance plan for the rule are going to be due a year later in 2016, in June of 2016, but we will probably many states will request and be able to receive extensions, especially states that want to join in multi-state regional programs. So where are we? What are we doing? We are in Maryland. We are well ahead of the other states on compliance planning. The CPP, the Clean Power Plan, has recognized regional multi-state programs as approved compliance strategies under the plan, and I know this is an environmental justice issue that I know that many have expressed some concern about. It explicitly recognizes the Regional Greenhouse Gas Emissions Program, RGGI, as an approvable compliance option for us. So what is RGGI? So RGGI has been in place in Maryland since 2009. It's a 9-state, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, market-based cap and trade program. It sets a regional CO2 emissions cap for fossil fuel-fired power plants. So our cap today is 91 million tons, okay? And going forward through 2020, we're going to reduce that cap by 2.5% every year to get down to another 10% reduction. So, over the course of since 2005, we have in the RGGI region reduced CO2 emissions from our power plant, our fossil fuel fired power plant sector, by 40%. And then by 2020, with a 2.5 reduction, we're going to get it down to 50%. So that's a pretty significant reduction from 2005 levels. And the way the program works is we issue pollution allowances, credits. They're equal to the cap, the regional cap. Every power plant has to purchase a credit. We do it through an auction process, quarterly auction process. Here's the really important part of this program that makes it as effective as it is in reducing emissions. The auction revenues we reinvest the vast majority of our auction revenues in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and low-income electricity rebate programs. All the RGGI states are doing that. And in Maryland, these auctions, we just had our 26th auction last week. These auctions have generated over $400 million in revenues for investment in these consumer benefit programs. We've had tremendous economic benefits. Thousands of jobs have been created, and the economy has grown in the region just in the first 3 years of the program by $1.6 billion. And all of this is with minimal impact on ratepayers. So, and then along with all of that, we have the co-benefits from this program, because as you reduce greenhouse gas emissions, you reduce co-pollutants, nitrogen oxides, SO2, and particulate matter. You're shifting to cleaner energy, lower emissions. I just want to say a couple points about the environmental justice.
We're really,
Okay,
we're
just
really
2 points.
going over. So
Yep,
wanna
I know.
Be respectful to other
Yep,
speakers.
So on a high level, the EPA's rule is going to reduce public health and environmental burdens for everyone. Okay, there's no question about that. On a more granular level, though, I think it's very difficult to assess the impacts on specific communities until the states actually develop their compliance plans, because it's all really with the states. I want to encourage communities to weigh in with EPA, weigh in with the states as the states start developing those plans. You need to engage. But I also would encourage you to keep in mind one very important point. This is a rule that is geared toward and designed to reduce GHG emissions, not criteria pollutants, not NOx, not SOx. And there is no local disbenefit from reducing carbon emissions in a particular community. It's the co-pollutants where you see the difference, that have the actual local impacts. So on that note, I'm sorry I ran over, I apologize.
All right, thank
It's
you.
really hard to cram all
It's
this
very
into
hard, I understand.
to 10
Thank
minutes,
you.
so
Can we
thank
give
you.
Kathy a hand? All right, Christy, come on up to the podium. Would you like to stay there or come here? Okay.
Okay, as you heard, my name is Chris Keels, and I grew up in Memphis, but I spent a lot of time in Mississippi, in a small town called Potts Camp, Mississippi. You might know Hollis Springs, Mississippi, or Rust College. That's the area. So I was born in 1954, don't add up the years. At any rate, during that time period, in particularly poor communities in Mississippi, people generated their own little power plants with wood and with coal. And so I would always notice that my relatives would circle around the wood stove or the coal stove, particularly in the evenings to stay warm. But they would say to the children, and particularly the women, not to sit too close because the particles would spark and ambers would burn your legs. But of course I didn't realize that we were also ingesting some of those things that we just heard about, like carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxide and particles that were entering into our lungs. And so as a child in Memphis, I lived near a power plant in walking distance from a power plant. So another big warning, but of course my parents didn't know, I didn't know. Went off to school to Boston College, which I'm sure was heated by coal as well. And then I ended up in Baltimore in a neighborhood, poor neighborhood, where in the parsonage, I'm married to a minister, the heat was oil. So in my second or third year at that church, I started to get very, very sick. Went to see a doctor, and he told me I had to have a biopsy of my lungs to see what was going on. And at first I was told that it was bronchitis bronchitis. And then as years went on, I kept getting sick and kept being hospitalized. Then a doctor said to me that when I was in college, I put small amounts of Vaseline in my nose because my nose would dry out. So he told me I had scarring in my lungs as a result of the little oil tanks that I had created from Vaseline. And of course, in naivete, I said, well, why can't you just drill it out if it's an oil tank? And so, of course, I have permanent scarring in my lungs. And so up until 2009, I was hospitalized every year, either for pneumonia or an asthma attack. And so in 2009, I decided personally there were some things I needed to change. One is I lost 47 pounds, yay for me, and I'm still working on trying to, lose the weight. Also, I realized that I had to take a very active part in understanding what was going on in my environment and how I could protect myself from the environment. Just imagine having to protect yourself from something that's supposed to be natural, and that's air and a human right. And so in 2013, I had a hip replacement, and the doctors all knew that I'm prone to asthma attacks. And when we arrived at the hospital, at Harbor Hospital in Baltimore, my husband and I kept saying we have to be very careful with mold, dust, we have to be careful with the perfumes that people are wearing. Is there any industrial waste being burned here at the hospital? Everything has to be sterilized. And so after I came out of the surgery, I had an asthma attack, simply because someone had come in who had been outside in the environment and hadn't sterilized themselves. Needless to say, I survived. But each year I'm in the emergency room at least 4 times a year, particularly when the seasons change. I'm probably about $9,000 in debt with hospital bills from poor air quality. So when I have to leave my home, there are several things that I have to keep in mind. Let me talk first about the equipment I have at home. I have a nebulizer. I take Advir. I take Singulair to try to keep my lungs open. I have to have my house cleaned once a week. I can't clean it myself. I have to watch the ozone layer to make sure they're good days for me to be out. I have to be concerned about industrial waste where I work or near where I work. And so when I leave my home, I also have a peak flow and expander and all those things that asthmatics have. But when I leave my home, I have to take with me a medical kit. And I was going to pull it out and let you see it, but it's too much stuff. So I have, of course, my ProAir, my emergency inhaler. I have to carry with me cotton balls because I get constant nosebleeds. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, leaving work in D.C., I work in D.C., I had to stop at Washington Hospital Center because I couldn't stop a nosebleed. Then I drove 295 coming home. I have to know the hospital routes wherever I go. So I had to stop at Howard County General. Most of the hospitals know me by now. And again, I couldn't stop the nosebleed. It started again. And then when I got to Baltimore, I had to go to Sinai Hospital because I couldn't stop the bleeding. And at that point, they told me I might need a blood transfusion, but luckily it all worked out. Also, I have to carry Afrin. Afrin's one of the few things that will stop the nosebleeds immediately, or will at least slow it down. And of course, it helps to keep my nostrils and nose system open. I've learned no Vaseline, use saline. Who would have ever known I could have used water back in those days? So I have to always make sure I have saline to keep my nose open. So when I get out of my car, I have to squeeze saline. And when I leave a building and walk back to my car, I have to squeeze saline and blow. Each year I have to, of course, have to make sure my flu shots are up to date and pneumonia shots. I keep Tylenol in case I get a fever. So sometimes with my aging situation, I don't know if it's a hot flash or a fever, but at any rate, I have to take Tylenol if I feel feverish in order to prevent any type of illness. When I get those really bad nosebleeds, one of the things that will help is if I use Bactrim, and that is to try to get those spaces in my nose that are been irritated by pollutants to heal. Sometimes they won't heal. Also tissue and cough drops, and I take Zyrtex, and I keep a mask in my purse, and I have to have plenty of fluids like water to keep me hydrated and to keep all those pollutants from interfering with my lungs. So at 60 years old, I have permanent scars that will never go away, some of which, of course, I strongly believe is a result of coal and burning wood and other things that I was exposed to. And of course, since I moved to Maryland, it got worse. And that's when I've been in and out of hospitals. Prior to moving to Maryland, I did not get hospitalized. I didn't have the emergency room visits. It's a very scary feeling to rush to the emergency room saying that you can't breathe, I can't breathe. You know, I've had people say to me, but you are breathing, but my air is being compromised. And so, of course, when you feel compromised, you're more frightened, so then you bring in or exhale more air than you need. And so I just want to really advocate for the fact that healthcare is really a major issue, and that the time that I spend in hospitals, the money I spend on medical care, I could donate that to a charity. I could be more productive in all my volunteer work. Right now, my company is being very, very supportive. So when I start to feel sick, they let me telework, so I can stay home and stabilize. So at least every other week, I'm home stabilizing. Tommy Landers, who's in the audience, we've had several meetings that I've had to reschedule because I'm home stabilizing. So if I begin to feel ill, my course of action is to stay home the next day, use my nebulizer, try to control any pollutants around me, take my medications, and try to get plenty of sleep and rest so that my body can build its immune system to be able to fight off my next day out in the ozone layer or in the poor air situation. So I don't want you to feel sorry for me, but instead what I want you to do is to be educated, to educate others, and to stay aware that every time I take a deep breath, my deep breath is being compromised. And so I ask that we continue to work on issues related to coal and oil and pollutants in our environment that affect us. My happiest scene is to see a windmill. And my second happiest scene is to see a storm, because I know a storm is bringing in fresh air.
is that it? And you did well, so I want to allow you more time if there's something else that you want to say, because oftentimes, again, I don't have as much
Well,
time as you
I
need.
do want to let me talk a little bit more about the healthcare costs.
Okay, talk about healthcare costs.
And so, through hospitalization, okay, let me approach it from this perspective. Most of our hospitals now have pulmonary units, and I used to think that was for old people. And now I'm beginning to realize I'm there with them, and so older people. But it's not just older people or children who are suffering from asthma. It's middle-aged people like myself who didn't live in this area, who moved to this area and realized that we were suffering from poor air quality. I know that industry is an important thing in terms of jobs, but we need to make sure we have clean power plants and industries that don't affect our long-term ability to survive in this area and in the world in which we live in. So the cost is, as I said, astronomical. I left Maryland. I was working for the state of Maryland and went to the federal government mainly to be able to get a higher insurance policy. So when I went to the federal government, I could afford a high option Blue Cross Blue Shield. And so generally, because of my history, but also because of my high option Blue Cross Blue Shield, when I arrive at a hospital and they pull me up on the computers, they realize I can pay my bill. And so they're willing to treat me very quickly. I am very concerned about the folks who don't have what I have. And I'm also concerned about what happens today when they look and realize I owe $8,000 and say, wait a minute, this woman is paying very slowly on these bills. So I just want you to be aware of the fact that the amount of money we spend on health care and hospitalization as it relates to illnesses related to poor air, can be money that can be funneled into other areas. Think about all the other needs in our society that we could spend that money on. And I would gladly prefer to spend my money in other programs for children, and I'm very big on reentry as it relates to ex-offenders. And so some of the other causes that I would like to be able to spend my money on. But instead, I pay $190 a week in insurance out of my paycheck. And that's a week, not bi-weekly, a week, to make sure that when I arrive at a hospital or a healthcare center, I won't be turned away. Last time I went to the emergency room, I was told I had to pay a $250 copay, and that was the first time I'd ever heard that. So if you're laying there and you cannot breathe, you do not want to hear, you got to write me a check for $250. And so my husband goes with me now so he can advocate with me when he can. You know, if I'm in the car by myself, then I usually write a note and say, I do not have the $250 on me, or I write you a check, because if I'm struggling for air, I don't have time to argue with you over $250. And so my husband in Baltimore always goes with me and fight that battle. So again, I'd like to be able to spend my money on some things that are much more meaningful to me, but I need to live. So I have to breathe in order to live. Okay.
I think it's always important that communities have enough time to speak. So thank you for allowing me to do that. Mike, do you want to stay up there or come up here? Okay, Mr. Mike Tidwell.
Start my timer. Sorry.
I'll be the gong.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. It's really great to be here. Chris, it's always amazing to hear your story, which I've heard a number of times. And if I ever have a second where I wonder if I'm doing the right thing with my life to promote clean energy, I just remember you and all the people you represent. And it's a great human rights issue, and a civil rights issue, and a everybody rights issue. I wanted to widen the lens a little bit. My name is Mike Tidwell, Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and just as we have these microcosms of people suffering from poor health due to our energy choices, of course we have this larger issue of the entire planet suffering because of our energy choices. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard the recent news that the West Antarctic ice sheet, about as far away from College Park in Baltimore as we could possibly imagine, but having huge impact on our state of Maryland. The West Antarctic ice sheet is melting, parts of it irreversibly. Just this last week, there was news that the oceans are warming so fast that now the water from below is melting the ice that's connected to the landmass, that once gone, it will just grease the rail for massive glaciers to pour in to our world's oceans from Antarctica. That alone could lead to 11 feet of sea level rise for the state of Maryland, which has 3,000 miles of tidal shorelines. So this is a huge issue. The Union of Concerned Scientists did an amazing study report a couple of months ago where they tried to quantify and say, well, what will it look like for Annapolis? What will it look like for Baltimore if we get 3, 4, 5 feet of sea level rise? And you could go on their site, Union of Concerned Scientists, just Google their recent sea level rise study, and you can click on, for example, Baltimore and Baltimore County, and 3 to 4 feet of sea level rise. Well, what will that mean? And they quantified things like 57 miles of roads gone, 2 schools gone, 3 churches gone, 3 medical facilities gone, thousands of acres of land, 2 waste Superfund sites inundated. This is the reality. This is what sea level rise, based on our use of oil, coal, and natural gas, will do to our planet and to our state. Now, there are a number of things that motivate me to be a full-time climate activist and to push for the windmills that you can look at and be inspired by. But one of the biggest issues is that in the 1980s, between 1984 and 1987, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It was called Zaire at the time. I lived among village folks in small villages, grass, thatch roofs, mud-walled huts. And for these people that I lived with in the middle of the Congo, it wasn't a question of clean wind-powered electricity versus dirty coal-fired electricity. They didn't have electricity. It wasn't a question of clean hybrid Prius car versus gas-guzzling SUV. They didn't have cars. There weren't even roads there. You're talking about people who contribute almost nothing to climate change in terms of fossil fuels, but who are right now being walloped by unrecognizable weather. Incredible droughts punctuated by unbelievable, unspeakable flooding right now. Climate change right now among these innocent people in Africa means food off the table right now for their kids. A continent of about 1 billion people who generate maybe 2 to 3% of all the world's greenhouse gases. Meanwhile, the United States, less than 5% of the world's population, we generate 25% of all the world's greenhouse gases. And you know, I often say in a perfect world, in a just world, a country like ours that generates 25% of all the world's greenhouse gases, we would get 25% of all the world's warming right on top of our nation, just telescope down on top of us. And if that were the case, if we got our fair share of the warming, our economy would already be destroyed. Florida would already be a series of islands. Kansas would be a scrub desert. But since we can share the warming with Africa, and share it with Bangladesh, and share the warming with South Pacific Island nations that are going to completely disappear due to climate change, we as a nation in the United States tend not to get too worked up about this climate change thing. And I submit to you that this is utterly and totally morally unacceptable, what we are knowingly doing to the planet through our use of fossil fuels. And that's what motivates me. That's the larger frame, I think, of environmental justice. Not just what it's doing locally in terms of health and sea level rise here in Maryland, but what it's doing to all these innocent people and nations all over the world who are vulnerable and are not contributing to climate change. So that's one of the really big things that motivates me. So what can we do in Maryland? The federal carbon rule is good, but it's not going to save us. It's not nearly strong enough. The federal carbon rule is really for the laggard states that are really far behind, that aren't doing much. The federal carbon rule is going to push them to do more. But what could a state like Maryland, that's already been active in promoting clean energy, do? And the reality is, in 2013, Governor Martin O'Malley came out with a greenhouse gas plan, a blueprint to guide all of us for the next 10 years or so. And in that plan, after careful study from the Maryland Department of the Environment and others, there are all these different policy tools for how we can decarbonize our economy. And the top, most powerful tool delineated by the governor's greenhouse gas plan, his blueprint, The most powerful tool was something called the Renewable Portfolio Standard. Sounds very wonky, but basically it's a clean electricity standard, a mandatory clean electricity standard. And what we need to do, because electricity, dirty electricity, contributes about 40% to all the greenhouse gases in our state. If we want to get serious about decarbonizing our economy, we have to get off of coal-fired and gas-fired electricity as fast as we can. And the good news is we can do it. We can do it quickly. So the really big bill in Annapolis, the #1 energy bill, you know, when we're talking about climate justice and environmental justice and energy justice in our state of Maryland, the #1 bill in 2015 in Annapolis that lawmakers are going to be looking at is a bill that would double the mandatory standard for clean wind and solar power. It's called a 40% renewable portfolio standard. Right now, we have a goal to get 20% of our electricity from clean sources by the year 2020. The bill that's going to be introduced would turn that to 40% and get there by the year 2025. You're basically talking about a big ramp up, a real increase in clean renewable energy. There's enough of it out there. We've already done the research. Regionally, there's plenty of clean energy that we can tap. It's affordable. It probably costs well below $2 per household. There's going to be a feature in this bill that will actually remove low-income ratepayers from being responsible under the bill. They will actually be compensated fully and held harmless because we feel that that's the environmental just thing to do. So this is a great bill and it can be done. Minnesota passed a 40% clean electricity standard in 2013, their House of Delegates. Their Senate didn't pass it yet, but they expect that bill to pass in 2015. There are other states looking to ramp up their clean electricity standards. New York, Massachusetts. The reality is Congress is stuck in gridlock. We know that. Half the people in Congress think global warming is a hoax. We know that. So let's go around Congress. If enough progressive states, 10, 11, 12 states, pass dramatic RPS standards like Minnesota, Maryland, New York, etc., and we get up to 30, 40, 50% clean energy, that's going to promote so much wind and solar that it's going to drop so much in price because of economies of scale. And coal and gas, yes, even gas, are done. We're done with fracking. We're done with tar sands. So the point I want to make is we're a small state. And, you know, some of our friends, more conservative friends in our state, even one who was recently elected governor, say, if Maryland unplugged everything, if we didn't emit 1 more pound of CO2, we would not stop 1 centimeter of sea level rise in the world because it's a global problem. Well, literally that's true, but if you follow that thinking, you would never change a light bulb in your house. You would never open a door for another person. You would never do anything kind or generous on a personal level that was right because that's not going to change the whole world. Of course we do the right thing. We do all we can. But on this issue, by passing a 40% clean electricity standard in Maryland, we have a chance of changing our whole nation, inspiring other states to follow in our path and literally decarbonizing the national economy because we're going to promote so much wind and solar and inspire other states that even without Congress, we're going to change markets. So that's the exciting news, and I want to make sure that you guys take action on this today. We have petitions at our table. We have fact sheets right here. Don't leave today. Do we have the petition clipboard here to pass around?
Not here, but we will at lunch and then later.
Okay. So I want to make sure you get signed up so we can inform you about this bill as it makes its way through Annapolis and that you get a chance to take action. One thing I will say that there are some folks who are concerned that this clean energy incentive might incentivize things other than wind and solar. It's a reality that unfortunately our General Assembly did qualify trash incineration as a clean, quote-unquote clean energy a few years ago. It was wrong. We fought it. We tried to get the governor to veto this bill of adding trash incineration to Tier 1 of the clean electricity standard. We lost. It became part of the law. The good news, though, is that there has not been a new trash incinerator built in this country since 1995. The economics, thankfully for us, the economics of burning garbage to create electricity just don't work, and they're not anywhere near being able to work. We've crunched all the numbers, and it is absolutely the case that even if you double the standard for clean energy, you're not going to incentivize any new trash incineration. I would never support a bill that I thought would incentivize trash incineration. So I just want to emphasize that that is the case. What you are going to see is a dramatic increase in wind and solar. Now, one last question. Everyone's thinking, well, we got a new governor. How are you going to pass a bill like that? A dramatic expansion in clean energy to fight this thing called global warming that maybe our governor doesn't even believe is happening. Kathy mentioned a dramatic bill that's cleaned up all our coal-fired power plants in this state, the Healthy Air Act, the biggest coal-fired power plant cleanup bill in the history of the world. There has never been a bill stronger than that one, passed in 2006 to clean up dirty power plants. And it was passed under a Republican governor. The Democratic General Assembly passed the bill. The Republican governor, he didn't veto it. He didn't let it become law without his signature. He had a ceremony to sign it into law. Divided government can still do the right thing. The original clean electricity standard that we're now expanding to 40% was passed in 2004 under the same Republican governor, Bob Ehrlich. We can do this. What we want to do is right, it is economically just, it is environmentally fair, it is a human rights issue. So I invite you, take action, get involved in this, and we can make this happen. Thank you.
All right, you all feel riled up? Okay. So we have heard from Kathy the state of the air in Maryland and what they have done to reduce some of the critical pollutants that are coming out of our coal-fired power plants. We've heard from Christine the personal perspective and why all this mess matters. And we've heard from Mike some tangible ways that folks in this room and beyond can get engaged. So at this point, let's spend the rest of the time talking. So if folks have questions, clarification questions, please come up to the mic in the middle so we can hear you. And if I don't get any willing volunteers, I have plenty of them. But yes, sir, go for it.
I'm Andy Fellows. Let's see.
Oh, goodness.
I'm Andy Fellows. And I'm also the mayor of College Park, so welcome to College Park. But I wanted to ask Ms. Keeler, the Baltimore City sort of piece of this. Has your city council and the mayor done much to sort of support both climate change and sort of address the issues you've been talking about? And I guess I really appreciate your remarks because it really brought it, I think, home to all of us about the healthcare impacts of the way that we've been doing things. Thanks.
Our local power, which is BG&E, has talked a lot about improving the use of our grids, our electrical grids, by using air from the ocean. But in terms of specific action, I'm not aware of any.
Hi, I'm Richard Reese. One of the things I do is I'm the energy chair for the Maryland Sierra Club. A couple of things that I noted, well, they were, certainly Kathy mentioned this, but I'd like to emphasize this, and I'll give you an opportunity to comment on it, and that is that there's a lot of industries and in service industries that stand to benefit from aggressive demand reduction. I know that you mentioned that as one of the key parts, one of the 4 points for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I guess the other thing that we're concerned about, a lot of people within the club are concerned about, is the potential to incentivize dirty things by increasing the RPS. I mean, we're supportive of increasing the RPS, but at the same time, we believe that it's a good idea to cap the bad stuff, to prevent it from being increased, prevent the incentives from going forward for increasing it. That's really mostly directed toward Mike. But I'd love to see other people comment on that as well. In other words, conservation and efficiency, and also making sure the increase in the RPS doesn't cause us to actually burn bad stuff.
Thanks.
So I think that's kind of a tech, so Kathy, Mike, you want to address
okay.
that?
So, is this on? Okay, so on your first question, I assume you're talking about distributed generation. Is that what you're referring to?
No, I'm actually referring to reductions in electric demand. In other words, using less electricity, thus burning less coal, burning less natural gas, eventually phasing out fossil fuels
Right?
through demand reduction.
And I'm just not sure what your question is. I mean, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well,
Right?
It totally is, but I guess maybe I wanted you to reemphasize it, and I'm interested in hearing about that also from Mike, because he mentioned renewable energy, but didn't mention that part.
Okay, so you're wanting to know what are we doing in the state of Maryland to facilitate expansion of energy efficiency?
Well, I guess the question more is, what kind of advocacy can we do for that? I know that we have Empower Maryland, and there are other programs for doing that, but it's a really key part of our push for clean energy.
Right. So the Maryland Energy Administration in Maryland is the key agency that funds energy efficiency measures. They get some of their funding for energy efficiency from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And so one important thing to do is to ensure that those revenues continue to be directed toward energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And I would say, that, and I'm just speaking for myself, not for this administration or the next administration, but I think, perhaps increasing the flow of funds to those programs would be very helpful, to increase the amount, the number of energy efficiency projects and the amount of reduction that we're getting. I mean, it's important. The power plants have these Empower programs. Under Empower, they develop their energy efficiency programs. There is a process in place for the public to comment on those programs, and I think it would be really important for folks who are interested in engaging on these issues to look at these plans that they have, because oftentimes there is a lot of room for improvement and enhancements, and the Public Service Commission needs to hear from people. We comment on them. We at the Department of Environment file formal comments on these plans, and I'm not sure just how engaged the community is on reviewing these plans and recommending changes and enhancements to these plans, because actually the funding that the utilities are putting into their energy efficiency programs is significant, but it probably can be enhanced and improved.
Okay.
We got to do more. No
And Mike,
question
did you
about it.
have a quick response?
Yeah, and just in terms of incineration, first of all, there's no way this bill is going to, as written, is going to incentivize incineration. To take trash incineration out of Tier 1 would be a multi-year major legislative battle. It would be a multi-year, we'd have to make that the priority for the next 3 or 4 years and get all the state's environmental groups working on it, because you'd be taking on the unions, you'd be taking on the next governor. You would just have to make that alone your priority for 3 or 4 years for something that we don't even need, because it's not going to incinerate, it's not going to incentivize incineration. So that would just be the argument that I would make. If you want to cap it or remove it, it's still going to be a multi-year major battle. So it's a question of what do you want to spend your time on for what results. So I'm happy to talk to you more about it and talk about the strategy.
Okay, thank you. And what I'm going to ask is that keep your question to one breath, so we can get through, if you can, just one question, then our speakers will be available after, because there's a short break. So thank you.
All right. James August. I've spent my adult life in the labor movement in for occupational, to remove toxins from the workplace and in the environment. And I just want to say one thing in response to your story is that what this is about, when you talk about, losing weight, getting in better health, all these things, these personal lifestyle choices, which are all important, of course, but it really comes down to a matter of involuntary versus voluntary exposures. And that's really the crux of public health, and what all of this is about, is all of us are potentially victims because we don't choose to be exposed to this stuff. And that needs to be our message when we're trying to organize around this stuff, that we talk about scarring in lungs. I dealt with people with asbestos, silicosis. Nobody chose to breathe these things in, but they suffer for a lifetime as a result of it. Now to my, the question I wanted to raise was, I just want to voice a note of caution, Mike. I've met with Tommy and stuff around the RPS. Obviously, we want to get to 40%. I'm now working with a group, I'm a consultant now, but I'm working with a group of folks that are concerned about sustainable businesses. And people have come to me, I'm not versed on the issue at all, so I'm just a conduit here. But people have come to me and have expressed a great deal of concerns about the incineration and other issues in Tier 1. And I'm just, I think I'm just asking that we figure out, we need to have a sit down with the groups that are voicing these concerns. If you say nothing's going to be incentivized, I can't, that conversation needs to take place before the session opens, so we get everybody on board with a position they can support, and if amendments are necessary, find out which ones are feasible without setting back the whole thing. But I think we need to step back and make sure we get as many players on the same page as possible going into the session.
Yeah, and those conversations have been going on for months, and we have all kinds of data on our website. You can go to ChesapeakeClimate.org. We take this issue on head on. We lay out all the reasons, arguments. So extended conversations with lots and lots and lots of groups. Met with the mayor of College Park, for example, and other people concerned. So that's ongoing for sure. And I would never support a bill that would lead to combustion of anything, period.
Yeah.
I've spent 12 years of my life pushing for clean energy.
Right.
I would never support a bill that would lead to combustion.
I'm not pointing back. I'm just being a conduit of people who have expressed
Sure.
concerns to me that I don't fully understand, but I want to make sure that there's a forum where
Sure.
everybody is fully informed about what the various issues are, so that we can not feel any reservations about supporting the RPS.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Richard Allen. I'm the Director of Equal Opportunity at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Good morning, everybody. Wanted to ask Ms. Keels, as a person who's been directly impacted by these carcinogens and your health matters and so forth, what's your perspective on how the Affordable Care Act of 2010 is actually working? And I'm not going to call it the Obamacare Act, but the Affordable Care Act, what it is, of 2010. How's that working from your perspective, or not working?
Okay. I think that it's a growing effort. It's still in transition, but I think that what it has done is provided more opportunities for people to acquire health care, and particularly education around some of the issues. The clientele that I work with in the inner city in Washington, D.C. are not really informed about climate issues. So it gives them an opportunity for greater education, greater awareness. So I think, and this is what we're going to talk about tomorrow, is that the faith-based community needs to get more involved in educating the communities. And so that's one of the areas I'd like to work in. But I think that the